Lord Dunsany, or as I like to call him, Eddie Plunkett, has a very distinctive style, as Le Guin says, much imitated. I want to talk about some formal features of the King of Elfland's Daughter that set it apart both from actual fairy tales and from most other modern novels. One of the things you will see in A King of Elfland's Daughter is an enormous emphasis on narrative summary. There is some description in detail. There's very little description. There is a lot of action. Actually, a lot goes on in these relatively slim 240 pages. Actually, enough happens in this book to fill something almost as long as well, two volumes of the Lord of the Rings, not the whole thing. But there's enough story here for 800 pages. And I'm not sure whether or not I would prefer that. This is much quicker because we are almost never getting direct depictions of things. We are always getting a narrative, almost always getting a narrative voice summarizing things and moving quickly. Um, A Wizard of Earthsea also relies heavily on narrative summary, not nearly this heavily, which is one of the reasons things move quickly. Le Guin can take a paragraph of that novel, and a huge amount of time can pass in that paragraph as she sums up what Ged was doing that year. But A Wizard of Earthsea will stop and do full dress scenes at much greater length. There are very few scenes here. When Le Guin, writing her essay From Elfland to Poughkeepsie, looks for an excerpt from Dunsany, Eddie Plunkett, for his famous style, she can't find one she likes of dialogue because he uses so little dialogue. It is well known among hardcore lit nerds, lit theorists, that you can divide every prose narrative is moving back and forth all the time between the extremes of what the ancients call mimesis, which is a more or less direct imitation, and the most direct imitation is dialogue. We're going to dramatize something, we're going to show you something, there's going to be a scene, and an extended dialogue is like, oh, you get an imitation, a mimesis of those characters' words, and diegesis, where the storyteller, the narrator, sums things up for you, moves it along. If you never have any diegesis at all, congratulations, you've written a play. If you never have any mimesis, any dialogue, well, it has odd effects. This is one of the reasons the book sometimes feels a little longer than it is, because in fact, it is an enormous amount of plot is happening in The King of Elfland's Daughter. He is not the only person who writes like this. Dunsany, aka Plunkett's style, is often compared to that of the English Bible, the 1611 King James translation of the Bible. And it's like the early books of Torah, it's like the book of Genesis. The book of Genesis doesn't have long amounts of dialogue at any point. There will be a few exchanges at most, and there's lots of summary. And then he went up to Canaan. Much the same happens in the book of Exodus. This is a biblical style, an old-fashioned style. It's also a style you'll find in folklore. And if you're reading a fairy tale, it's not gonna tell you everything that happens to the hero as he wanders through the woods. It's gonna say he wandered a long time over many perils, and we've moved along. This is actually a feature of oral storytelling where we're not gonna get caught up in the details. Dunsany, Plunkett, doesn't get caught up in the details that much. She is more interested in setting scenes and showing us the beautiful scenery of fairyland and of the borders of fairyland than that. It's a distinctive choice, and it's having real effects. You should always be thinking about what is the narrator showing us, mimesis, more or less directly, and what is he telling us? Nobody doesn't tell some of the time. Every writer has to stop and tell you what's happening in a quicker, more summary format, or we would never get anywhere with any story. The story would never move forward ever. Everything would be longer than War and Peace. But if you're telling all the time and never showing, there are various results. A King of Elfland's daughter is one of them.